So, good morning, good people on YouTube. Gabi here. We're still in lockdown here in Germany, and I'm still bored because I'm on holiday, and I still have some wood left for a new guitar project, namely this reclaimed wood that I got from the renovation of our school's aula. That was about 2 years ago, and the walls were covered in these all solid mahogany boards. So I claimed all of that, and I said before it went in the trash, I wanted to have it to build guitars from it, which I did. Namely six guitars that were up for sale, and we used the money that I gained from that for financing our India project, because we're sending street kids to a grammar school so that they can get an education. But due to Corona and the lockdown, we couldn't use the normal sources for making money for that, so I thought I might build these guitars for sale, and it went well. They're all gone, and now I have to rebuild some because some more people wanted to have these guitars. So you can be part of the process when I'm building this new jumbo for a pupil of mine from scratch. So I hope you enjoy. Keep healthy, stay healthy and happy. Okay, bye. So since some people asked me to do a voiceover, I'm attempting that today. What you see here obviously is how I cut the boards to length so that I can run them over my planer and put them together for the two halves that I have for the top and the back. Here I am marking which pieces belong together and number them so that later I know which I decided to be next to which other, so that the grain hopefully makes a nice pattern, because from these reclaimed woods, of course, you have to see to that you get a nice figuring, or at least a consistent surface. This is my clamping method by using a triangular board. Here I'm preparing the neck at a 15-degree angle cut. I'm taking off the extra material because I'm putting on a head plate anyway. After planing it, I'm sanding it, and finally it's time for the neck glue joint. I'm putting in some baking paper between the actual neck and my clamping device so that it doesn't stick and glue on. I steam bend my sides, which you see here. I built the steam box, very, very easy construction. And here I've got my jig, and as long as the wood is still hot and steaming, you can easily bend it over the jig. But this only works with particular woods. Here you see walnut. This is very good for bending. Any fruit is good, like apple, cherry, plum. Then we've got bocote, maple, and a lot of others that you see in some of my descriptions. I'm running the glue together boards through a planer to a basic thickness that I can work with for putting in the rosette. Later I will send them down to the right size. So here I'm gluing together two of the pieces for either the back or the top. I don't really know which one this was, and again using my clamping method with this triangular board that I just wedge in so that the two sides will be pressed together. I know there are different ways of doing that. There are people who have particular jigs for that, but this has worked well for me. And here's my trusted old car battery as a weight to just keep the board in place while I'm wedging it in. Roughly sanding it so that all the glue marks and whatever is on the top or the back goes away. I think this needs not much explaining. I'm putting the shape of the guitar on the respective piece. In this case, that's another jumbo that I'm building on request for one of my pupils. Sound hole dimensions. My sound holes have 10 centimeter diameter, and here I'm cutting out the channel for the binding. Depending on what kind of binding I'm using, this of course is different in size. Here the customer wanted a relatively small binding with some abalone inside, so I'm fitting that here, figuring out whether my binding channel has the right width, and it appears that it is a good tight fit, and here I'm putting in the abalone. Bit by bit, there are of course some other materials you can get. I like these small pieces because you can use them in different places for bindings, or here in this case for the rosette. Sometimes it's a bit, you've got to fiddle around a bit, but it has always worked for me this way, and I find this process quite relaxing. Putting in some super glue to keep it in place. Yeah, that's how the rosette goes in. Taking off extra material because that makes it easier to sand down the super glue later. Again, my trusted baking paper to keep it from sticking to the battery. Cutting out the sound hole at 10 centimeters. And here is the top. Which I cut out here on my bandsaw, which is not a particularly high-class model, but it does the job. And I have gotten used to it. Here I'm sawing the bracings to the radius that I need, roughly doing that. Here's the fine tuning for that. That's a radius dish. For the top I have a 40-inch, and for the back it's 15 inches. Here I'm taking off any saw marks and making it completely flat, checking in the radius dish whether it fits nicely, and then I do that with all the bracings before I glue them onto the back. I like starting with the back because that's the first thing that goes on the sides, because it's easy to work on. You've got these parallel braces depending on what kind of guitar it is. You just put them in the right places, glue them tightly, clean it up. I use a triangular razor blade for that, and that was that. So some people put this reinforcement strip in before they do the bracing. I like doing it this way because in functionality I don't see any difference, and this makes working on the bracings easier. Normally I shape the bracings roughly before I glue these pieces in. I don't know why I did it differently here, so now I have to take care with my mini planer that I don't cut into the reinforcement strip. And you see I've left out the two pieces for the heel block and the neck block. I could have measured that, but that gives me not a lot of room to maneuver when I finally put on the back or the side. So I leave that out and just glue them in once the back is on. Sanding it. And together with the kind of doming that you do, in lack of a better word, and the chiseling, you take off material and you make the sound come out more, and you do that, well, I do that at least, yeah, after my feelings, I go there, I tap it, I vibrate it, and of course I have plans, as you can see here, but that's basically a orientation. I start with that, and if I see that I want to take off more material of the bracings, I do that. If I feel like it's fine, then it's fine. So these things are very individual, I think. I follow basic plans, and this has served me well. As we are preparing the bridge plate, my design is this trapeze form, and this is made of mahogany in that case, because I've got a lot of mahogany. The thickness is between 3 and 4mm, normally cutting off the edges a bit or angling off the edges so that it doesn't look too bulky. And the grain should run in a perpendicular direction to the soundboard itself, so that the stability in this structurally important place is very strong for taking the string pull. So here, a process you see me do many times on my Gobar deck that I built myself. Not a very special thing, just 2 boards that are parallel to each other, and these are old arrows that I use from fiberglass. They're made of fiberglass, and I use them for clamping as a Gobar deck. Not much more to say about that. You clamp it, you glue it, you clean it up, and then the bracing is on. I do that in the radius dish, as you can see, so that the top takes the shape it is supposed to have in the end, like in this case a 40-inch dome. Taking off material, taking off more material. And here, of course, the chiseling according to my plans, with a bit of personal taste in between. I like that job, particularly when it is good wood and the fiber of the wood goes off nicely. I think that is a very satisfying process. Sanding, not so much, but then again, it feels nice after that and it looks nice and very smooth. Here I'm rounding off the edges of the sound hole. And after that, the top is more or less done. What you didn't see was how I drilled the hole for the truss rods in the top bracing. Okay, here I'm cutting the sides to fit, so that I can glue in the neck and the heel block that will take the neck. And of course in here I'm preparing these blocks and I'm making them from reclaimed wood as well, so I layer them together so that I've got the right thickness. This is the one for the bottom part. Rounding off the edges, and here I'm gluing them into position, which means they're in the center and they are hopefully perpendicular to the edge of the sides in the end, since they are still too big and have to be planed down, which I'll do later. I have an orientation line on the sides and the middle of the sides. So clamping, people like a lot of clamps, and here I am taking off the radius. What you don't see in the video is how I put it in my radius dish and transferred the radius with a felt pen onto the sides, and I'm taking down material. Here you can see the line. I'm taking down material close to the line, and then I fine-tune the rest, measure, and do these things. I know people put them in rotating radius dishes, but I don't do that. Here I'm putting in the kerfing with the trusted method of using enforced, by rubber bands, enforced cloth pins. In the particular places where I need a bit more pressure, I use these small clamps, as you can see. Put the bracing on as precisely as possible, because there will be some sanding after that to make it all even on top where the kerfing and the side meet, so that I've got a perfect surface for later gluing on the top and the bottom. So here I'm taking out the material where the braces meet the body. Some people only take the material from the kerfing. I go all the way through the sides too, because later there will be a binding over that, so I don't have to care if you can see any bracing or not. So gluing it on, I use a brush for doing that. Sometimes I clean it up with my fingers, but people know it can be messy with the glue. So actually, I forgot a step here in between. Normally I put in the reinforcements for the sides before gluing the top and the bottom, of course. Here I simply forgot it and did it later. So it is easier if the top or the bottom is not on yet, if you only have the sides of the guitar. Yeah, but sometimes I'm doing that, I'm working, and I keep forgetting things or making it more complicated by saying, oh, I should have done that before. But this is the process of building guitars, and you're learning on the go. So I'll leave that in my Gobar deck, press it on with my trusted arrows, and here I'm just making everything even with my trusted cordless, whatever that is, router, I'd say. Okay, here I'm cutting out the wedge for where the sides meet on the bottom. I don't know what that part is called in English. I'm clearing it out with a chisel, and after that I'm putting in pieces of wood, whatever I have at hand. In this case it's mahogany with walnut and maple, and I think that gives a nice look, particularly when you put a finish on. And I chose to do that in the different directions so that the grain runs perpendicular to the rest, and that gives a nice optical effect as well, I think. So I've wedged it in and I clamp it and leave it to dry for about half an hour or so before I can go on. So here you see I put in the rest of the reinforcement strip in the back. Now I can measure that and cut it to size so that it fits with the neck and heel blocks perfectly. So I don't have to worry of how to put on the back. Once it happened to me in the very early stages that I put on, I think it was the top, and then no, it was the back. And then I realized, of course it was the back, and then I realized that yeah, this reinforcement strip was sitting on top of the neck heel block, and that was the neck block, and that was difficult because I had to get it flat afterwards through the sound hole, and that was not so easy. It worked all right, but I could have avoided this by using this new technique I'm doing here. Here, clamping it again on my Gobar deck. And there you go, box is closed. Okay, here I'm gluing the heel block of the neck to the neck, and it is not really important that this is wonderfully perpendicular. It can slide a bit because later I will run one side over the planer so that I get a perfectly perpendicular and straight side, and that is my reference point for all of the work I'm doing. I make my own fretboard. Sometimes I buy blanks that have inlays in. This is one of those. Routing the truss rod channel. And here I'm fine-tuning and flattening where my butt joint with the body and the neck will meet. So I'll do that for the neck and the body to get a perfectly straight surface. I run that over 60 and 80. No, is it 80 and 120? 80 grit paper. And here I'm checking if the line is completely straight. So now I know that my neck fits with the right angles. I do bolt-on necks. Some people don't like it there, but there are very renommed manufacturers that do it that way. To my mind, it's a very good way of doing that. You can take it off easily if you had to do any work. It's very stable, and if I played my guitars with a dovetail or with a bolt on, had you listen in a blind test, I bet you wouldn't be able to tell which one is a bolt on and which one is a dovetail. I think there is a lot of myth and mysticism behind what kind of necks you use. I know that Good Old Guitars does it like that, and James Goodall's fantastic guitar, so I have no doubt that this is a good thing, and this is the way I do it. If you want to do it a different way, feel free to do so. I will do bolt on necks. Okay, preparing the holes. By using bigger and bigger drills, so that I can put on the bolts from the inside that go into the nuts that I put in the neck. So, cleaning it out a bit so that we've got a nice flush fit. And here I'm checking the fretboard position. I meet at the 14th fret, and of course it has a center line and it needs to be completely straight with my other center line in the guitar. Here I'm putting in some holes to put in some nails actually that keep the fretboard in position. Here's the first, here is the second. That comes in handy when you glue on the fretboard and to find the position later. Cutting out the excess tape so that the area under the fretboard extension that you see here will stay on. So when I put on first finish, which is True Oil, that I have an area in the end that I can glue the fretboard on, so I need the plain wood for that. Yeah, I'm marking out the rough position of the neck so that I can saw the fretboard, so they can saw off the neck here. I always start from the fretboard side to the heel in order to avoid any cuts in the neck that might be hard to sand out later. So this turns out differently each time because I just put it on freehand, my line, and then I cut it out and shape it later to my liking. So taking off all the rough excess material, preparing the neck for further work on it. Since my bandsaw only allows for 10 centimeters, sometimes it is hard to get the neck through, but here it was just about the right size to cut off the heel block. Yeah, nothing much to say here. So okay, in this rough shape I put on the fretboard. You see I have got a different strip in this case of maple that covers the truss rod slot and makes the surface even for the fretboard to be put on, which I'll be doing now with a gazillion of clamps. I think there are different philosophies about that. I like clamp pressure and basically in each position of the fretboard, because if you put on another board and just put on 2 or 3 clamps, I find that sometimes to be difficult and you might get some space between the fretboard and the neck, and to avoid it I put on a lot of clamps and I put them on relatively narrow, as you can see. Okay, leave that. And then I think the next step will be the headplate. Yes, which I layer. I choose different kinds of wood. This mainly is for the optical effect that I want to have in the end, because I don't do any binding, but I cut an angle to that sandwich. I call that the headstock sandwich. And I cut an angle to that between 25 and 45 degrees, depending on the kind of guitar. And that will bring out this sandwich, this layering, as with a pickguard, for instance, which makes for a nice look, and I don't have to do a binding on the headstock. And I like it that way, that's why I do it this way. And I can use old scrapboard that I've got lying around, sandwiching it to different color code, which is different from guitar to guitar, depending on what I put on. And I normally have the top layer of the material as a rest from the board from the back. So if this is, for instance, a mahogany guitar, the cover on the head plate will be mahogany on top. If it is walnut, it's walnut, and so on. So here I'm shaping the neck to my basic headstock shape. I find this plain and simple design quite appealing, It's classy, nothing too fancy, good to work on because of the curves, nothing too difficult. Here I'm using my planer to get the neck roughly to the right width, and to take out any saw marks that are left on the bandsaw. So I'm going down for that, and once that's done, all around the neck, I'm sanding it flush with the binding that I put on. Which you can see here. I think it's nice here to see how this reclaimed wood still has the coating from the walls it was on. Okay, so here's some fine tuning on the headstock shape, taking off the saw marks, sanding it flush and level, all the curves. And I really like my spindle sander for that. I just bought that like a year ago or something, but it's a fantastic tool and I really love it. It's good for a lot of things, and now I'm wondering why I didn't buy one earlier. So here I'm rounding off the edges of the fretboard, which is comfortable, I think, to play in. It gives you that feeling that you have a very smooth transition when you put your hand around it. I've owned guitars that have a very sharp edge there, and I didn't find that very appealing, so that's very comfortable and I like it. Here I'm routing out my logo, which are my initials, and I do that freehand all the time, and then I use different materials for filling that. In the beginning I used wood pieces. In this case it's wood dust, that I'm putting in and later seal it. It can be different things. Epoxy works well with different things in abalone, whatever I like. And this is a very easy and a very plain and simple method that always works. So here I'm preparing the neck for putting in the frets, and I've got a different technique. This is something that I learned from Ben at Crimson's, to put in the glue in the slots before. In former times I used super glue for that, and as Ben said, and this is very right, I think, it's very messy to clean that up, but you can clean up Titebond very easily, or any kind of wood glue. So I hammer in the frets first and then cut them to length. I know a lot of people do it so that a lot of fretboard material overlaps the sides, but this is not the way I like it. The way I do it, at least the side that is on the treble side of the guitar, is put very well in place, and I do have to do only little work. Here I'm cutting off the excess, and I do that at an angle already, so that I don't hurt the binding, and I already have a nice smooth edge there. So here's my sandwich that has dried. I'm sanding that down to height I like. This is different all the time, and actually it doesn't really matter a lot, but you have to make sure that your tuners fit through it. Because there's nothing you can see, but I'm checking out if my headplate has a center line and fits on the headstock nicely. And here I'm gluing it on with my trusted clamps, sawing off the excess, and you can already see the sandwich that I have here of different woods in different colors, so that would make for my substitute binding. Yeah, here you can see it quite nicely. And I like to use woods that show some contrast here, which makes it obvious that some thought has been put into that process. Okay, of course, sending that to level with the rest, shaping, fine-tuning on the headstock. Okay, and here you see how I use a 45-degree router to cut off the edges, which brings out this sandwich I'm talking about. And it also gives the guitar's headstock a smooth look and not as edgy as it is with some. Okay, some fine tuning with a razor blade. Here I've got like walnut, whatever this light wood, it is not maple, it's some softer kind of wood. I don't know what it is, I have it from my scrap box. And mahogany on top. Here I'm cutting the slot for the nut, it's bone nuts, and I wish there was an alternative. I know there is tusk in these things, but I don't like them as much. And I wish for an alternative because I would like my guitar to be vegetarian, but the abalone and that, yeah, that's a kind of a sacrifice that I'm making. Maybe I'll find something in the future. And here I start shaping the neck. Normally I have got different proceedings. Now I do it differently. Here I do it with the spokes shave directly, but now I'm first taking the neck down to its final thickness with a planer, and after that I'll take a round-off router to take off material from the sides, and then I go about with the spokes shave. And after the spokes shave, of course there is a rasp. I bought a new one now, a Shinto rasp, and I will see how that goes with the next guitar. Shape the neck, shape it. Yeah, to the way I do it. First with a rasp, then with file. And after that, there is a long process of sanding. Sometimes it can be satisfying. With this particular 50-year-old mahogany, this works relatively well because it's a material that takes any kind of tools really well, but I've had different kinds of woods. So I said the sanding is not a thing that I enjoy a lot. I like planing though. So here's true oil being put on, which pops the grain and is my way for open pore grain instruments, and this mahogany is very open pore. I didn't put a heel cap on this particular guitar because this was one of the line in the school project that I did, and I sold them relatively cheaply for a hand-built guitar. So I didn't put on a lot of fancy stuff with them, like extra layered heel caps and extra bling bling and this and that. Yeah, because they wouldn't have paid off so much. And for those people who are interested, I sold those guitars for €500, which is, as you know, not a lot of money for a hand-built guitar. But anyways, I mean, they should be affordable for pupils of our school so that they can have, a good guitar and a reminder of their time at school, because, as I said earlier, this is made from the walls of our aula. So here I'm cutting the binding channel, and on this particular model there goes a maple binding, which looks nice with the mahogany and the walnut on the sides. I pre-bend the binding with the same method that I bend the sides. I put it in my steam box and I put it over the jig, leave it there. And here you see the pre-bent binding that I'm putting in the slot using wood glue, because it's a wood binding and that works very well. I use the trusted method with the tape, put it on, check out whether the binding sits nicely. And normally I use the tubes of bikes to wrap it around, but with the wood binding, that went quite nicely with the tape only. Sanding it off, scraping it flush with a razor blade. And the pieces that need tending to. Okay, and here I'm cutting out the slot in the body for the truss rod that goes inside the guitar. I'm sawing it, then gently taking off the material from the top. With my chisel, using a clamp here to make the no tear out and to have a clean break off. And I'm cutting material from the neck block so that the truss rod will fit. I do that in a V shape from one side to the other, so that I can take out relatively much material so that I don't have to chisel and file a lot. So here I'm going from this side to avoid any tear out or break off in the heel block before I start chiseling out the leftover material. And once that's done, I use a round file to fine-tune this area. Yeah, since this is taking off grain in a different direction, this is not so easy to chisel that off. So I do that by hitting my hand against the back, or the palm of my hand against the back of the chisel, bit by bit, so to take off that material. And there should be the file, the round file. And I start by filing that off, and then I extend that through the hole in the top bracing to check out whether the truss rod would go through nicely. I'm checking out the fit of the neck, and I realize that there's some tape in the way. Okay, I see I have to take off more material here to make the truss rod go in nicely. Checking out, filing some more. And here goes the final fit, and there it is. Checking out whether I've got a nice fit, and this seems good. Okay, here I'm finding the position for my bridge, and you know how to measure a scale, I guess, and you have to add some 3.8 millimeters. That's what literature tells me, and which has proven to be nice for compensation, for string compensation. So I'm marking those lines, A, the scale length, and B, the added millimeters for string compensation or saddle compensation. I put my bridge into position, drill the holes for my fantastic clamping device that I really, really enjoy. Here I'm rounding off the edges with my trusted Bosch one-hand cordless router. Very, very handy thingy, I love it. Checking out whether it's nice, then of course I fine sand that. And after that, the body is ready for its first finish of true oil. I really like true oil for these open pore woods, and I don't do glossy finishes on those guitars because A, I like an open pore look, and B, it's so much easier because you will use lots of filling material or lacquer if you want to spray mahogany and this kind of walnut glossy. So I like that look, and the bicolor look with the walnut and the mahogany I think is something different, and it's nice. And it's nice how the grain pops, and I put the boards together quite nicely so that you wouldn't even realize that the top is made out of 7 pieces instead of 2 pieces. So I'm oiling it, I'm wet sanding with the oil. I start with relatively rough woods with 600 and then go to 1000 grit paper directly. I find that process very nice. I like wet sanding a lot. It's a good thing. Okay, and by wet sanding it with the oil, I'm closing pores. And I let the sawdust and the oil sink into the pores here, which is perfect. I take off the excess and clean it off with a clean cloth. Go around it to check out whether I've reached all the areas evenly, and then I hang it to dry. And I do that for a couple of times, many times. I don't know, maybe up to 8 layers of true oil or something that I put on. Okay, here I'm preparing the neck glue on. I don't know if I do have the bolting on in this video, but what I do is I prepare this area with the glue, then I put on the neck, put in the bolts from the inside, screw them, and then I clamp the neck into position. So what you see here is how I'm putting it on. The right position, nice and good fit, I like that. I like that neck on this guitar particularly. When I built that, I was like, hey man, that's one of the best necks I've ever met. It felt really, really well. So here I'm using my radius, my fretboard radius according to the guitar, which is 14 inch, and clamp the fretboard extension to the guitar. Then I'm taking off the glue with a straw. Take off the tape and then clean whatever is left, but this was very satisfactory. Installing the tunis, which is not magic, as you might know, but I didn't show how I drilled the holes in this video for the tuning pegs. You can do that on the drill press best to get the best results. Yeah, and I use a cone drill for the beginning to avoid any tear out. Here I tighten the tunis with the little screws from behind. Next step, clamping and gluing the bridge. And I really love this very, very cheap actually clamping device that I got. In former times I did that with clamps through the sound hole, but this one is very clean and it gives you the freedom to work around the bridge directly after that, and you don't have to go around clamps. So I can take off the tape immediately and I can clean whatever squeeze out there might be left with my trusted straw. And I've got a million of them because my 91-year-old mom loves to drink cocoa from these little boxes that you have, and I've got a lot of these straws left. So here I'm leveling or taking off any high spots in the frets, checking whether they're flush and even, a bit more on the edge so that you don't get any string buzz. Taking off any excess material on the sides and cutting an angle, rounding off the edges. This is basically a job that I don't like a lot, but recently I've got new tools for that. Actually, a long planing block with the radius of the fretboard, and this makes things a lot easier and makes this job more fun than it really is. Here I'm crowning, rounding off the frets again so that the string would sit in one particular point and not a surface. Checking out, and I do that against the light to see whether I've got a nice dome there. Then the next thing is I use the same doming device and put 1000 sandpaper on it, and then I go over the frets once again. Of course you can do that without this device, but then you normally would have to put a lot of tape, and I don't want to produce so much waste. So as you see, now that I'm polishing the frets and the edges of the frets, I am only using 2 strips of tape that I basically use for the whole fretboard, maybe 2 sets if they wear out, but that's it. Here I'm adjusting the height of the nuts, checking out whether I've got the right position before I glue in the nuts, and then the guitar's finished. What you haven't seen is how I shape the saddle for the guitar. the string settle, but I use my radius block that I have for the fretboard for this piece of bone too, so that it has the right curve. And here goes the finished guitar.